Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Aditi from ISWA, and I'd like to thank you for connecting with us from around the world. For today's masterclass on recycling and emerging economies, we will be joined by several experts from around the globe. A couple of presentations will be followed by a question and answer session. And currently, we've muted all the participants, and we encourage you to type your question in the chat to your right. Before handing over to our moderator and speakers, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the main sponsors of ISWA, which is Veolia, the City of Rotterdam, Ecomondo, and Messi Munich. And of course, thanks also go to our Platinum members. Without the support and generosity of these sponsors and Platinum members, it would be very hard for us to bring you these webinars for free. We count on the support of all members, and so if you're not yet a member, please take a moment to visit our membership website by visiting the link on the screen. You could also reach out to our membership manager, Mr. Daniel Purchase, by writing to him at dpurchase@iswa.org. We have several flexible membership options with discounts for students, low-income countries, and online members. We encourage you to join us, and we are planning on organizing member-only webinars in the future, so join us for those as well. So before I hand over to our speakers, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce ISWA here, since a lot of you today who are joining us on this webinar are not yet members. The International Solid Waste Association is a global and independent non-profit making association working in the public interest. It is the only worldwide association that's promoting sustainable, comprehensive, and professional waste management. At the same time, we're also promoting transitions to a circular economy. We are open to individuals and organizations from the scientific community, public institutions, and public and private companies from all around the globe, working in the field of waste management or just interested in the field. We enable our members to network with professionals and companies and institutional representatives from all around the world, and our mission is to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste management. We currently have members from over 100 countries, and we would like to, of course, grow that network even more. So without further ado, I'd like to now give the floor to Dr. Anne Scheinberg. She's the chair of ISWA's Working Group on Recycling and Waste Minimization, and she will be moderating today's session. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Aditi. I'm very happy to be here and have a webinar on my most favorite topic, which is recycling. And I'm fascinated by what's happening in emerging economies. Today, I've been working on recycling for about 40 years. You can hear in my voice, I started in the US, and I emigrated to the Netherlands twice and have been living here permanently since 2002. And I have recently said that I think I have worked in about 78 different countries. The people who are here are people who are representing for me different kinds of experiences in recycling, and we're really here to answer your questions. So the setup of what we're doing today is that our first speaker is from Serbia. She'll tell us about a company wanting to recycle 100% of its products. Then we have a speaker from the USA and a speaker from Morocco talking about how recycling works in their environments, and a young professional from Australia who will field your questions and pose them to the panel. About half of their time together will be in presentations, or even a little less than half, and almost an hour is reserved for questions. So please, there's a question box. Please start already writing your questions if you have them, or as they come up, and Emily will ask them in the question and answer part. Thank you. With that, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Ms. Jelena Kish from Ball Packaging in Serbia, to come on stage, introduce herself, and tell us about getting to 100% recycling.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the introduction. I'm Jelena Kish. I'm based in Belgrade, working in the company called Ball Packaging Europe. This is the the leader in can production, and based in Belgrade, I'm doing sustainability on a European level for the company in general. But besides that, I'm very much involved in waste management issues in my other part of the job that I do, which is regulatory. So I'm doing regulatory overviews for the Central and Eastern Europe, in short. So I did prepare a few slides just to explain you a little bit our efforts to go to the 100% recycling and why it is really crucial for our business to do so. In general, first slide that I want to show you is that our sustainability efforts are much broader than recycling, of course. We are doing lots of on the topic of responsible sourcing of aluminium. For example, all the ball plants in the Europe are certified by ESSI. We are working on cradle to cradle on all the materials that are used in production to be safe and for the usage, and trying to go on new generations. Those are all things that basically we are very much in control. Like this one, the third one, like most efficient can, for example, this is all about the reduction in the production, reduction of the usage of the aluminium. This is all about the engineering, etc., etc. Also, fourth part of our sustainability pillar within the company is something that we are very committed to, the CO2 emission cutting. We are 100 renewable energy driving company. But the fifth pillar is really the one that is challenging us a lot, because all of those that I mentioned are basically something that as a company we can have a really good control within our company, but also with our suppliers. But going into the 100% recycling, this is something that we need to do with many of the partners. I will just go briefly to a few slides, just explaining that can is really simple packaging, monomaterial, like made only out of the aluminium. Few percentages are made out of the steel, but those are all metals that are remelting easily, so it's easy to recycle. And the price of aluminium is really like high, so that's why we do have like high percentage of recycling. In Europe, it's like 74% at the moment. On world level, it's 69%. Comparing to the other materials, it's easy. It is really good results. And as I said, we are the world most recycled beverage packaging, which is like really title that is really good to have. And then maybe you are really now asking one question, why we need to go to the 100% recycling, because comparing to the other packaging, we are already like the champions, we can rest a little bit. But this is not the case, and I will explain you why for our company is very much needed to be on a high recycling rate. One thing that you mentioned already in the introduction is this circular economy, circularity of the material. So this is a comparison between the different packaging materials. This is the part of the life cycle analysis that we did like recently as a company. And now you can see one interesting, let's say, circularity characteristic of different material, which means that, for example, this is like a number of the extra packaging units that you can make in a certain recycling rate. So you can see that cans are above 95% of recycling. You can see how this curve is going really up. So for us, it's very much important to have as much as possible circles, and that's why we are very keen to have a high recycling rate. this is the one of the reasons. There are plenty of those. Of course, this is a valuable material. This is a material that, and in comparison to others, really need to have a recycling rates, etc. But one of the important thing is actually this circularity. So why is that? So the reason why this number is really high comparing to the other packaging materials is basically that the yields are really good when you are in the process of remelting of the cans. Like let's say that we are losing by each less than 2%, which is really in comparison to the other materials. Let's say we are the best performing packaging, metal packaging in that field. So the second reason why recycling for us is a key is, of course, CO2 impact. And you can see the graph. So as much as recycling rate is going up for cans, because we are fully aware, of course, for the can production, you need to produce aluminium. To produce the aluminium, you need to extract the aluminium from bauxite ore. You need to spend a lot of energy creating virgin materials. So by doing recycling and having recycled aluminium in our product and having recycling rate going up, we are lowering, of course, our CO2 impact. So this is the key driver as well for our packaging to be so ambitious with recycling rate. So, and then we asked to us a question how we can achieve this 90% of aluminium can recycling by 2025. And in Europe, we were doing the roadmap to recycling, to scan all the European level countries to see what we need to do in order to have this recycling rate. So this is the existing recycling rate. So you can see, I mean, for example, this is the scope of my countries here. So see, I mean, the differences are huge. Please note that some of those recycling rates are metal recycling rates. Those are not aluminium at the moment. So this is the 2017 numbers, which means that the aluminium and steel were not reported separately. So some of the countries are reporting basically metal figure. But anyway, I mean, how to achieve that? I mean, it was a big question for our industry. And I need to say that packaging industry in this, let's say, level of influence is not the most influential ones, basically, because all of those systems are paid by the obliged industry, meaning the companies that are putting the packaging on the market, not packaging producer companies. So basically, to cut the short, we are not paying for the system, so that's why we are not influential in that way. I mean, we are not by law obliged to pay for the system. But in order to achieve this this high level of recycling, we need to influence somehow. And of course, we do have associations like Metal Packaging Europe or a European Aluminium Association that they have certain level of the influence. But what we concluded is basically that the knowledge and sharing the knowledge and sharing the best practices is maybe the best way how to approach that issue. So aluminium recycling is not science fiction, it's existing. It is like remelting of the metals are existing from prehistoric times. Basically, everything that is produced is remelted out of the metal. So 75% of our aluminium ever produced is still in use. And we do have like a processing industry in place in Europe. Like so this is not the issue that we need to export waste somewhere. So it's valuable materials, it's remelted in Europe, and we do have really proper companies that are doing that. So, and they are very keen also to kind of foster recycling and foster recycling rates in order to have recycled material. So this table that I prepared here is a table that is extracting some of our conclusions out of the roadmap to 90% recycling, and here is the countries that I'm following more or less. So the thing is that it is not the whole Europe. That's my point. It's Eastern, and this is like Eastern and European countries. Don't bother to go into the details or to read these slides. The main point out of this is that it is so different case within each and every country that is really amazing. This is basically comprehensive study. I think that it's more than 150 pages basically. The thing is that in some countries, I mean, you have huge information gap. There is like lots of recycling, but it is not reported. So we do have a knowledge that, for example, recycling rate, like in Serbia, is maybe like a 45%, but we cannot prove it, and this is not the official number. So there is also recycling gap. I mean that for example, collection is high, but the actual recycling, it's not. So there is a really, and I call this slide like mosaic approach because it's so different in many of the countries. Also, the price of the aluminium, it's so very different. So that's why we will try to influence in different countries differently. One of the key drivers also for high recycling rates is deposit. So this is a map showing that in many of the different European countries, deposit is coming. I don't know if you are familiar with which type of system it is, but basically you are paying with a piece of the packaging, certain amount of the money, and when you return it, then you have your money back. So this is the key driver in many European countries, and this is what is going on, and we are heavily involved in that. Also, I mean, in many countries, it's just the case that waste management companies, especially in Eastern Europe, those are publicly owned companies, they just need to introduce so cheap sorting facilities, you know, for aluminium, which is like just steady current. They just need even to adjust, you know, a certain wideness of the eddy current of the sorting facilities, etc. Those are so small changes, but nobody was bothering about that. And for example, we as industry are trying to show how much they lose if they don't implement the equipment correctly. And of course, besides what I mentioned, this incineration, of course, aluminium is in the bottom edge of the incinerators. This is not our preferred option, but if there is incineration, we are trying to put some technology, knowledge sharing for the companies to extract the aluminium out of the bottom edge. What is, for example, very interesting in Eastern European countries, and Greece, for example, it's informal sector collection, and the aluminium that is coming from that sector is really huge. For example, in Serbia, more than 95% of recycled cans are coming from these people. And what we find out in the study is that the price difference is so huge. For example, in south of Serbia, it's even 10th of the price, for example, comparing to the Belgrade prices of the UBC. And what we are really trying to push is to get the money from aluminium industry and from us as a can makers, not only from our company, but the others, to try to provide better pricing, fair and transparent pricing, so those people knows about the price and they can join and they can formalize quantities that they are collecting. So this is one piece of our activities that will go further One of the way that you can do it is, of course, using these voluntary take-back machines. Those are basically machines you put the material and then you get your money back, but it's not like a deposit. It's like material-based price of the money that you are receiving for the recycled cans. Yeah, okay, I was so quick not to be interrupted, sorry about that. I think that you got the picture how different approaches you need to have, and you can, of course, replicate some of the approaches that you are having. For example, for informal sector, we want to develop different kind of IT solution like application or something to help people to be official part of the system and to help them to have better pricing. Because as an industry, you can understand us, we can get the super perfect price for the recycler, for example, but then the collectors, recycler can take the margin fully and the collectors are still without the good price, of course. And of course, we want to have to offer better pricing for the DRS, for the deposit countries as well. And we want to work as well as much as can with the waste management companies, simply to prove that they often forgot really about the cans, because cans are like 3 or 4% of the material that they are dealing with. But the thing is that this is so valuable materials that it's paying out like very, very quickly any of the investments that you are putting in. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can imagine that there are I think I saw there are 154 people, 160 people out there, and I hope they are all applauding for you. Thank you. I'm going to, you can write your questions in the question box, and Emily will take them and put them together and ask them for you in the question period. I'm going to move into my presentation. This is the masterclass part. I don't have very many pictures. I have a lot of diagrams, and I'm going to try to put into perspective what Jelena was saying and what is going on in emerging economies as far as I understand it. And a lot of this is a little bit of basic concepts and vocabulary. I will make sure that this PowerPoint, and I think Jelena's also, are available on the ISWA website, and you can study this more if you find it interesting. I am talking about recycling as existing from two quite different landscapes or worlds, you could say. We have the recycling value chain. This is Jelena's ball packaging up here. She is the end user of recycled aluminum. And to get to her, a company processes it, that you saw the eddy current, they sorts it. A smaller scrapyard buys it. They buy it from a mobile collector or a very small scrap dealer or junk shop. And that first buyer, that very small company, is buying it from an individual, a family, an informal collector, or sometimes from a shop or from a business. This is what's called the value chain. And what I want you to notice is that the value arrow is going up. This is a private sector landscape. And it came about in the 19th century during industrialization, the Industrial Revolution. I'm actually going to go ahead one and come back to this slide. This is the service chain. This is ISWA's core constituency. We have houses and businesses. There are companies and public works companies and public cleaning companies who are collecting, removing waste, sweeping streets, emptying litter baskets, and those materials, whether they have value or not, are going to a controlled dump site. And here the value arrow is going down. Waste or materials like an aluminum can or a newspaper, they have more value because they're pure when the household is ready to get rid of them. And if they've been mixed in the garbage truck and dumped on a landfill or in a dump site or gone through an incinerator like you saw the cans, then they have less value. So the first sort of masterclass lesson about recycling is if you want high prices and good materials, you have to start when they're clean. I will say also about the service chain, unlike the value chain, it's a local and national set of institutions. They're generally public, and this sector also came about in the 1880s, by the way, as a result of a very big pandemic around cholera. That was a big motivator for creating solid waste systems in the 1860s, 70s. And their job is to leave a clean, empty space behind. You might want to notice these two institutional worlds exist side by side, but without what we would call recycling policy, they simply don't touch each other. In fact, they don't really like each other very much. There's a lot of suspicion. I lived for quite a while in the Yelena's neighbor country, Bulgaria. And in Bulgaria, basically, a lot of people in government think that if a private company is making money, it has to be cheating somehow. And I met very smart and very highly educated people when I was living there who said, oh, he's making a profit, he has to be a criminal. So this is a case of the service chain not liking the value chain very much, but also the value chain doesn't always like the service chain. Now I'm going to jump back to and go for some sort of deep masterclass concepts and vocabulary around the value chain. This is just like a zooming in on the value chain. This is the end user, the producer, or what we can call as a shorthand, the market. And they use the materials in production. In order for the materials to be available for them, there has to be a value chain where those materials are collected. Because once the consumer gets them or the restaurant gets them, the default is they could go into the trash or they could be collected separately. The processor is the one who has that eddy current machine that Elena was showing you. And in some places where there is separate collection from households, they also have a kind of processor that's called a MRF, a materials recovery facility. They're very popular, for example, in Metro Manila in the Philippines, where the collectors go around house and house and they collect a mix of different recyclables, and then they get sorted out at the MRF. In places where there's not municipal separate collection, most recyclables come to the end user via a junk shop or a scrap dealer. And that is a person who is a trader, a private sector recycler who buys materials, puts small quantities together to make bigger ones, makes them denser so they squash them or they cut them up so that they're heavier when they ship them, stores until they get enough, and trades them. And by the way, these trades are highly global. I sometimes say that the small individual family recycler is as connected to the big recycling industries in Asia as I would be to the electricity plant if I stuck my finger into an electric socket. This is so globalized. They change the prices in Taiwan, and in Belgrade, they know it in a few weeks, and everybody pays some version of what they've changed to in Taiwan. The junk shops and the scrap dealers get their material from a very small private sector business called a first buyer, sometimes formal, sometimes semi-formal. This can also be sometimes this can also be like a nonprofit or an NGO who is buying, or a community-based enterprise. And they get them from families, from informal collectors. And these guys are what we call the informal sector. They're only informal because they're too small to be registered, or they don't want to be an official business. Just like some freelancers are registered as freelancers and some other ones are just doing the work and they don't have a registration. I'm going to let you look at this for 15 seconds, think about questions, write them for Emily, and then I'll go back to the rest of what I'm talking about. Okay, these next 3 or 4 slides show how real systems mix the service chain and the value chain. This is pretty much what the situation looks like in Serbia, where Jelena's company is based. There isn't much formal or pink recycling activity, but the semi-formal and informal traders, they're visiting households. Sometimes they're visiting transfer stations or even visiting disposal sites, and they're getting recyclables and selling them over here. And if you ask me what's the best and clearest definition of recycling, I will say to you that the value chain is willing to pay for it. If the value chain is not willing to pay for it, it's something, but I wouldn't call it real recycling. And that we can have a longer conversation about that when I'm finished with the schemes. This is pretty much what the European Union is saying that recycling should look like. This is a very complicated and crowded picture, and that's important because the simplicity of Serbia has gotten it's gotten a lot more crowded. What you see here is there's often bio-waste or organics collection. The household waste is getting collected and going to a sanitary landfill or sometimes an incinerator. And there are also separate vehicles or separate containers where the households are giving their recyclables separated for collection. In the Netherlands, most of those are fixed containers like on the street or in shopping centers, but in many places also there's a separate collection for mixed recyclables that in my country is called PMD, plastic, metal, and drink cartons, and that's where the UBCs would go. Then it's the municipalities who are actually paying for those recyclables to be cleaned and sorted, and they are reporting them to an extended producer responsibility system and selling them to Jelena or her competitors or colleagues. What's interesting about this is that although that richness of mobile and fixed large and small businesses is pretty much extinct in lots of the European Union. So the guy that Jelena buys from the most, he's a guy named Voja. And as Serbia goes towards EU accession, his business could be in trouble because here, this is where he is. And when you see here, he's not there anymore. And so this is how the system looks in Bulgaria at the moment. There's much less than the EU would recommend in terms of a richness of ways to help households and businesses get their recyclables to the value chain. There's a little bit of informality, but technically it's considered illegal. And there's a few bins and a few buyback centers and a very active EPR system. And now, and that's actually my last slide. This is the legend. And I'm going to stop here and take a breath. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite the other speakers on stage, or not speakers and resource people. First, I'd like to invite Michael Simpson, and he'll introduce himself quickly. And then I'll invite, immediately after Michael, Mariam Alawi and Emily Newton.
Well, hello to all you good people across the globe. Like Ann, I've been involved in recycling since the early 1980s. Over that time, I've directed private sector regional marketing of recycled materials to end-user industries. I have worked in the public sector at the state level, developing recycling policy and regulations. I have consulted to both municipalities, governments, and businesses, both in the US and internationally. And I have gotten my hands dirty by developing and operating recycled materials recovery facilities. And throughout this period, I've conducted primary research and have been an educator on the subject. So let me frame what I do as a solid waste professional by giving you 5 areas I'm always considering when focusing on recycling. First, recycling is an environmental and health issue, not only from the public health perspective of keeping the streets clean, but the larger scale impacts from the pollution of air, water, and soils of materials that are not recycled. Second, recycling is about preserving and extending the material natural resources that for many countries are in limited supply, and as well as minimizing the energy used along the process of extracting, manufacturing, to delivering products to consumers. By far, the largest environmental impact comes from the extraction of raw materials. Recycling cuts out the energy use, land use degradation, and the associated pollution from this large negative externality. Recycling does allow renewable natural resources time to be restored, and for non-renewable natural resources to have an extended time of use into the future. I might also point out on this slide, every time you see the word energy used along the production chain, it also means that you are releasing greenhouse gases. Third, for me, recycling is substituting natural resources that materials production companies require. Thus, recycling is a strategic aspect of the supply chain of the manufacturing sector of the economy. And we heard this from our 2 previous speakers. To this, recycled material must meet the same, and I emphasize that, meet the same specifications of quality as the virgin natural resources. As such, I have focused a lot of my work in recycling on how do you meet the specifications so end users can use them. As such, the recycling system needs to have a structure and a set of operating procedures to ensure quality specifications so that we can recover and avoid the impacts of using natural resources. Now, concurrent to all of these perspectives of recycling is the economic realities that come with it. At the most basic level, as we move to make solid waste systems environmentally safe, the cost increases. We pay for those costs either as a fee or through taxes. Now, if we recycle materials, we can avoid such disposal cost. And when materials go into manufacturing as secondary materials, often the cost of production is reduced. Now, let me just close by saying my background initially was in biology. So a specialization of mine is to focus on how to collect, process, and utilize recovered organic components of the waste stream. So with that, I'll just leave it there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that fall within my domain.
Thank you very much, Michael. Please stay on stage. Jelena, please stay on stage. And let's get Miriam on stage. And maybe we can lose my presentation here so that there's room for Miriam on stage. Welcome, Miriam.
Hello. Hi, everybody. So I'm Miriam from Casablanca, Morocco. It's such a great pleasure to be here with all of you. So what about me in brief? Basically, I'm an environmental engineer. I have also economic degree and also in management. Currently, I run a consulting company which is specialized in sustainable economic development and gender approach. I'm involved in sustainable economic developments. It's very important to me to stick economy to the environment and also to sustainable development. Maybe we can talk more about this later. So it's nice to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Now we're about to go over to the questions part. So I hope all of the 158 of you who are out there have started to think about questions. And I'd like to invite Emily Newton on stage. And she's going to ask the questions on your behalf. And I'd just like to say, Emily can introduce herself, but I invited her to field the questions because we are aiming this webinar at mid-level or professionals, and she's a good example of somebody who's been working in recycling for a few years, but less than 10.
Hi everyone, as Anne said, my name's Emily. I'm a new member of ISWA this year, and I'm also a member of the ISWA Youth Professionals Group. I attended the ISWA Swiss winter school in Texas this past January to learn about landfill management, so that was my introduction to ISWA. I work in recycling infrastructure investment in the state government context in Australia, and currently coming from Melbourne where it's nearly 11 p.m. So good night to you all. No, but I'll be online. Yeah, I've recorded all of your questions down, so we'll go through them in a moment. Very exciting questions have come through, and there's not a lack of questions coming through. So if you're happy to, I might start off. Helena, you've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to start with you. I'll go with one of the big questions people have got. This is actually a combination. So this is a combined question from the multiple audience members. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write it in the chat box for you because it's sort of multi-question.
Okay, but can you speak it first and then write it?
Yeah. So is a deposit refund system the best/most economically viable way to increase recycling rates for beverage containers? Additionally, how can you install take-back machines but still have the informal sector working and still have the municipal curbside collection system working? And, well, can they work together? And could you provide an example where a harmonious system with these informal curbside and used take-back scheme does exist?
Yeah, it's a really good question that let's say that people started to ask exactly the same question about the deposit system, because at the moment we can see that deposit is spreading all over the world, not only Europe. So that's why deposit need to respond on all of those questions basically that you asked. So it's not like, and there are some certain developments in the new form of the deposit system, which will try to answer on those questions. So if we are talking, is it the best system for recycling of beverage containers? You can really discuss that in many ways. I mean, EPRs can do the same, but it is very effective and bringing, like in 2 years of implementation, really high results. It is expensive, but in a way you can efficiently implement the DRS, and you can, so this is like very key how you implement DRS. DRS as a system can have many frauds, and you need, of course, to be very careful how to implement it. But basically, if you have knowledge and experience from other countries, and if you have agreement among all the stakeholders, you can implement it correctly. How the informal sector is fitting into the deposit system is basically informal sector at the present moment, for example, in Serbia, is selling all the UBC or all collected cans to the scrap dealers, to the recyclers. As I mentioned, the pricing is so different, and for them, they are damaged in many ways in some of the regions of Serbia. If we are talking about the DRS, I mean, then the price is the same, and they are dealing with the machines more or less, sometimes manual handling, but basically for them, it's not improvement of their life, let's say, or something like that, but in a way, they are anonymous, they are putting the can into the machine or other forms, and that's how they are basically produced, and the quantities collected up at the end reported. But what we are trying to do as a company is basically, we are working a lot on a development of the new systems of the DRS that will be future or 21st century DRS. And we are trying to at least have a knowledge how to follow up. For me, it is very early stage at the moment to explain that, but let's say that we are trying, and many of others are trying to introduce DRS and to introduce new technologies like digitalization and applications, etc., so people can easily recycle their packaging to this new form of the deposit, which means that the let's say those machines that are giving you money when you do recycle your beverage cans can be really much cheaper with this new technology. So it's completely like shifting the scenery of the deposit, where you have like cheap bins. I mean cheap, I mean not cheap as the existing one, but in a way much cheaper than the reverse vending machines. This technology still can be incorporated in the new form of the deposit, but in a way we are trying to respond to the people that want to recycle on a street, on a let's say metro station, etc. So I don't know if I did covered with the answers all questions raised. Maybe I missed something.
No, that's okay. It was a very loaded question.
I think we'll probably come back to that. I just want to remind Emily that Michael has to leave in 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So if there are specific questions for him, it would be good to put those up front. The rest of us can stay until 3:30 our time or whatever.
Yeah, I think, like, I've got a question for you. So coming from the USA, because we've heard about EU in this context, but we've got people from all over the world. Coming from the USA, what is the most important advice on recycling that you could offer to people in emerging economies? Which again is a very broad question, but...
Okay. Well, in looking back of when we really started to really institutionalize recycling in the 80s, that Ann and I actually worked on a number of projects. We started with the residential recyclables. That is the materials that we could recover from residents. And that was fraught with a number of complexities. And if we had taken our initial energy and focused on industrial and commercial recycling, we would have diverted a lot more material quicker and then moved to residential recycling as a second step. And so this is just a retrospect of looking at how much materials can you capture, how quickly, and turn them back into manufactured products. So even though we did start with the residential side of things, we learned a lot about it. What is different, I think, between the US and Europe is the producer responsibility. We really do not have a large producer responsibility initiative in this country. And people are moving in the field, want to move towards that. But primarily it has to do with how we market our recyclables. And historically, we have moved over the last 30 years, moved a tremendous amount of our materials overseas to end user markets, especially in Asia and Southeast Asia. What has occurred very recently is China, and then followed by the Asian tigers, they have changed their specifications as far as the quality of the product they want. And so it is, for the US, it's no longer a lower cost option for recycling because they are turning away our material in such that we have not allowed our industry base to continue to operate in the country because we sent most of our recovered material overseas. We lost a lot of those facilities, and it's going to take a good 10 years to reestablish that industry base within this country to take the recycled material. So currently in the US, recycling is in a crisis.
Thanks. More questions for Michael?
I've got another question for you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
How practical and effective is it to do modelling and mass balance of volumes / nutrients for organic solid waste management options?
It takes work, and you actually have to I've done this for recycled materials, doing a mass balance through the system, sort of the kind of systems that Ann was showing, going up through the value chain as well as the service chain. It requires going out and getting information. There's multiple ways of getting information. To get regional or state level or federal level or governmental level information, often we actually have to do a very intensive study, and then we extrapolate that to the larger whole to try to get an idea of how that influences policy decisions. But it is easy to do. One thing about organic, well, it's true for all materials, but one thing about organics is the weight of the material is quite variable because of the moisture in it. So you have to take that into account when you do such mass balances.
Okay. Let's just take a pause. Thanks, Michael, for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
And have a good afternoon or your good morning for your time.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Michael. And I've got a question for you. So this is a combined question from a few different audience members. Do you have any advice about how to work with policy leaders in emerging economies to improve recycling? And how can we promote this issue as important? And with the political factor, why do emerging countries allocate so little budget to waste management?
That's a great pair of questions. I'm going to start with the second one. And the second one is, when you don't have money to purify the water in the hospital, which of your citizens are going to agree that you should spend money on waste management? Waste management is literally the tail end of many people's priorities. And part of that's because they don't realize that less people would end up in the hospital if there weren't waste lying on the streets. In fact, there's another way of answering the second part of the question, and that is that it's generally true. I wrote a book, or I edited a book in 2010 called Solid Waste Management in the World Cities, where we looked a lot at what % of family income people are willing to spend on waste management. And it's very interesting in rich countries like where I live in the Netherlands, or really poor countries like Haiti or Bangladesh, people are willing to spend 1% of family income. So in the Netherlands, my waste management system costs about 380 euros, or about 400 US dollars a year. And so that's what most people in my country are willing to pay. In a lot of countries, that comes out to something like 100, no, even less, comes out to like $30 a year. And when you have that little money in income, it's very hard to make a fancy solid waste management system. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't invest that money better by making a system that works in your local context. And since we're talking about emerging economies, I'll say one other thing, which is that in emerging economies, it's very often true that people are willing to pay 2% of family income, of household income. And that's because there's a growing middle class. There's a lot of expectations of having a better living environment and cleaner cities and more room for businesses. And so emerging economies can afford to pay a little more. In the meantime, I've forgotten the first part of the question, but maybe I answered it anyway.
Oh, it was about how, would you have any advice about how to work with policy leaders, like politicians, to get waste management on their agenda?
I like to take them to visit the dump site. Most politicians have never been to the dump site in their city. They send their lower downs to do that. And sometimes you need to invite a so-called high-ranking person from another country who wants to see the dump site before the politicians will go. So that's a tip. When I was working in the city where Aditi lives, Bangalore, India, I had a colleague there, my local partner, and he used to make jokes about how I could only get the commissioner to come to see the waste system when I have a European face to go along with me.
Thanks, Anne. I'm going to jump to Miriam because we haven't heard from her yet.
Yeah.
So we've got a question about what is the percentage of the cost involved in transporting waste to recycling or MRFs or composting centres in Europe? Oh, sorry,
I didn't
not in
get
Europe.
the question.
What is the percentage of costs that you've experienced what is the percentage of the total cost that is spent in transporting waste to the recycling centre, the composting centre, or the material recycling facility? Is it,
Okay.
I'll summarise it. Is it a high cost to transport the waste?
To Europe?
No, within the local economy.
Okay, so maybe let me just give you overview of Moroccan history with recycling. If you don't mind, Morocco has undertaken a series of strategic action during this last decades, especially for regarding the waste management sector, such as strengthening the legal framework. This is very important to understand the present situation. The implementation of solid waste management program, support of the National Household Solid Waste Program, develop a national master plan for hazardous waste, and also to reform the local taxation. But even if all these actions are good and we are considered as a good student, there is a lot of things to do. Regarding the legal framework, for example, we have a huge legal laws, but it doesn't mean that we are able to apply all these laws in the field. By the way, we adopted a lot of international and bilateral agreements that concern waste and environmental management, but specifically in the field, household waste we don't have a national framework to household waste. Municipalities are in charge, and you maybe to answer your question, the cost of transportation, it's part of municipalities' budgets, and it's paid by taxes. So there is a lot of things to do to improve this this part of this part of waste management. But maybe I can tell you that this is a public-private partnership to manage this part, and companies and specific international company work together with the municipalities to improve this framework of waste transportation too. I don't know if you have all the answer.
No, that was a good answer. Thank you.
Okay.
And I have a question. It's another combination of audience members. Yeah. There's lots of consolidated thinking going on here. So, in an emerging economy, from a business point of view, would you advise partnering with, if you had to choose one or the other, partnering with government or operating as a private company? And additionally, what was the other question? Do you need intervention from government authority to have a very good recycling system?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Either Miriam or Anne can answer that one.
Oh, so Anne, she's an expert. Maybe I will share with you the Moroccan experience, but Anne, she has the global overview. Go ahead, Anne.
And you're on mute. Oh, yeah, no worries.
Okay, thank you. Very good. I'm off mute. Now, I like to use the example of what Jelena has heard me say this before, quoting the Christian or Orthodox Bible about the Caesar God principle. So the Caesar God principle says, let Caesar do what Caesar's supposed to do, and let God do what God's supposed to do. And what that means is there are some things that governments are good at. They're good at playing God. They're good at setting the rules. They're good at making the playing field even. And they're good at doing things that require everybody's participation. They are not very good commercial organizations. If you have ever heard that the municipality or the city in which you live is selling things, it's probably part of a scandal. Cities are not organisms that sell. They buy, they organize, they hire other people, they hire companies. And so for something like setting recycling targets or making a policy that says that everybody should be separating their aluminum cans and giving them to the recycling system. A government is who you want to cooperate. For who you want to actually operate the eddy current in Yelena's factory, there you probably want a private company. And if you want somebody who's willing to work hard for very little money, then you probably want small micro private sector, what are called livelihood businesses. And that includes the people that we call the informal recyclers. So figure out what you can get from different actors in the system. Ask them what they're good at. And when you are in the position of being able to make a plan or to make a strategy or a policy, try to let everybody in the system do what they're best at.
Okay. So maybe, can I go?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe specifically here in Morocco, to answer about if we need the government or state to manage it, of course, yes, because at least we need the legal framework, we need the laws, we need the cooperation between both parts, private sector, public sector. And also there is another sector, this is the informal sector. Informal sector for our economies are very important. And the link here in Morocco, specifically the link between the private sector and public sector is this informal part. Because we previously talked about this, you know, that this value chain, the first level of this value chain is in informal sector, and there is a specific point for I already mentioned that the legal frameworks and applying law is very important, but we have also the social impact and social influence, and sometimes it doesn't mean that if we have rules, if we have law, that we are able to apply it on the field, because there is this very vulnerable parts of population. I mean, rag picker, I mean, all these small hands working on the dump sites. And the private sector couldn't work or can work without these small hands. And the government can't apply the role as it's regarding the social part. So, for example, in Morocco, the waste collection, the private sector is in charge, I think, around 74% of waste collection. Of the urban population in more than 106 communes and 80% of the urban waste tonnage. But this, what I want to do, yes, we need cooperation between public sector, private sector, and this third sector, I mean the informal one. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you both. Yeah, I by the way, everyone, I'm seeing all the questions come through and I'm writing them down. So if I'm not getting to your question, it is being recorded. Elena, I was going to ask, given the topic of this presentation being on the EU sphere of influence on emerging economies, what is the importance of the EU Waste Framework Directive for your company?
Unmute.
Yeah, me too.
Unmute yourself. Good.
Yeah. Of course, Waste Framework Directive is very important, and that's why I did try to answer on the questions writing about what is driving basically high recycling rates and what is driving at the end introduction of the deposit and all the efficient system for the recycling is piece of package of the law called circular economy and of course single-use plastic directive, but yes, circular economy is putting targets high, especially by decoupling the aluminium and steel target and high plastic targets as well, glass as well. So the thing is that this piece of legislation was really, I mean, super important for the industry to sober up a little bit, to try to be so proactive also in let's say commenting and also in introduction of the different ideas for the implementation of the circular economy. So for us, it's of course eco-modulation, for example, of the fees that industry is paying by putting the packaging on the market is really so good. I mean, we see that is as really fair enough, finally, because, you know, if we are talking about those new directives, we are talking about that finally in every European country, measurement point of recycling should be the same. And this is like, it was so different until recently, like every country is having, some country was like reporting collection quantities, some country reported recycled quantities, but now the measurement point is the same, which is key then to go further and to see what are the real recycling rates. We are seeing as an industry that all other packaging, like I will not mention others, but they will, the numbers will drop down a little bit because of that, because now the measurement point is recycling, not the collected quantities. So this is the first piece, of course. And the thing is that circularity matters, all those things. And what for me, I am at the end environmentalist, more or less. For me, in this piece of legislation is basically very important that you are basically avoiding, and in many countries like in France and Italy, they already implemented this eco-modulation fees, and this is basically economic parameter. This is my cat, of course, going all around my computer, sorry about it. But the thing is that all these economic measures are really key and very important, because then if it is for you so expensive to put certain packaging on the market because recyclability of that packaging is not good enough, it makes trouble in the process of recycling, and then your industry fee that you are paying for putting that packaging on the market is higher comparing to the packaging that is already having these eco-design measures and it's already having high recycling rate and high recyclability, then, you know, this is really push up for the industry to think on eco-design base and to design product and put product on the shelf that is recyclable. For me, this is the key, because consumers, people in general, I don't like to call them consumers, people need not to bother, you know, if this for example, closure is like one form of plastic and the label is third one and the paper, you know, so there are so many mixed messages how to recycle some product. It should be all the products that are highly recyclable should be awarded, and for them it will be they need to pay less fee comparing to the ones that are making troubles in recycling, and knows that, for example, that so many, you know, it's not like usually my experience is, you know, talking with the industry, they don't even know, you know, that PVC label, for example, is making trouble in recycling. You know, they don't, I mean, simply they are thinking about a nice label and nice colors, and that this fits to the marketing plans, but they should now introduce sustainability at the very beginning, at the designing phase.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I'm going to do a this one's going to seem like a change of pace, but just to represent some of the questions in the audience. And I have a recycling planning question from Arwa Anuti. Do you have any advice on countries that have incineration or are planning to do incineration, and how to introduce recycling in these countries? As I imagine a few people in the audience would be facing this. Oh, you're still on mute, sorry.
Yes, I have some advice. And one piece of advice is don't wait for it to be sure if the incinerator is coming or not, because there are a lot of situations where it looks like an incinerator is a good idea and there's even a donor, and there a lot of systems look like they're on go, but the incinerator doesn't come, or in many emerging economies, even if it comes, then nobody can afford to operate it. So one of my pieces of very practical advice is don't pay too much attention if you want to implement recycling to whether or not an incinerator is coming. The one thing that you should pay attention to is whether the incinerator operator is asking for flow control or not, because flow control can be trouble for recycling. It means that municipalities promise to give their materials to the incinerator whether or not they're recyclable. When I was a young professional, this was a much bigger threat than now. In most places, when they plan incinerators, they don't plan them with a capacity to take all the recyclables. But the second piece of advice is not only don't wait, but start as soon as you can with some part of putting your recycling system together. And that usually means find some materials that are highly marketable, that are not being optimally collected or directed to markets, and work on those low-hanging fruits. Because once people get accustomed in their houses or in their businesses to separating and giving for recycling one material, it's really pretty easy to add another material to that practice, or to add another one, or to say, okay, now we're going to give you a different bin for your kitchen and garden waste. And if you make the system easy for people, and if you make it consistent and simple, you'll start getting the recyclables, and then your mayor or your regional governor may be less interested in the incinerator. On the other hand, if you're in a really big city, it may be that an incinerator is not a bad idea, and in some places they are quite working quite compatibly with high recycling rates. Scandinavian countries are a pretty good example of this. I would never be a fan of putting valuable, shiny aluminium UBC cans into an incinerator and getting them out as half oxidized junk. But there are some things that do pretty well in an incinerator and not so well in recycling systems like single-use plastics. So the two main things are don't wait for the incinerator, and in fact, don't wait for anything. Just get going.
And you just had a perfect segue, because my last specific question was going to be about single-use plastics or plastic packaging, and then I'll open up to a question that all panel members can ask. So my question for you is, what do you think of setting recycling targets for single-use plastics?
Is it a question to me?
Yes, sorry, yeah.
I think it's a waste of time because single-use plastics aren't usually recyclable. So the recyclable is a moving target. For something to be recyclable, there has to be industry and there has to be markets, and it has to be a package or a product that is actually possible to recover. I have a wonderful film that I was participated in making in 2012, where we asked informal recyclers what they would like to say to producers if they could. And they actually said it on film. And there was this one informal sector woman recycler, professional recycler in Pune in India. And she said, what I want to say to the producers is, if you're going to make something that's so small and so hard to pick up that I have to bend over with my bad back 130 times an hour just to get enough to buy one bread, then you should make that more valuable, or you should make it bigger so that I don't have to bend over 130 times per hour just to have my children and myself eat.
That's a powerful quote. What was the film called? I'll write it down.
Actually, it's not a publicly available film. It might be on the website of German International Cooperation, but yeah. I will find out if I can put it on the ISWA website or make it available somehow. It was just called Extended Producer Responsibility and the Informal Sector.
Yeah, I think a really just a bit of context. I lived in Nepal last year, and traditionally Nepal didn't have much single-use plastic, but now, you know, single-use plastics is getting everywhere around the world. I can open this up to all the panel. We'll go with Anne, Miriam, and then Helena. Do you think that packaging can be eliminated? And what time frame?
Miriam, unmute.
Yeah, yourself. I just want to add something about the plastic. You know, here in Morocco, it was a very huge problem because we use not recyclable plastic. But you know that Morocco organized the COP22, and it was occasion for us to promote a law to forbid this kind of plastic. And since 2016, I think, we don't have any more this kind of plastic. We have recyclable one. Yes, and this is I think a good. It's good to share this with you. So sometimes laws and this kind of events helps, and also population are more aware about this, about the dangerosity of this kind of material. And also, if you don't mind, I have there is a question from Ricardo Sousa. I want to give him our experience. He asked how to integrate informal sector, some good guidelines. In quick proposal here in Morocco, the government starts a kind of self-entrepreneur status. So when they said this self-entrepreneur status, they have in mind to help this kind of population involved in informal sector to enhance their income, to have social and health care insurance. So they start this since 2016 also. But till now, we don't have a very important results, because one of the participants write down that they don't want these people. They don't want, because there are it's kind of mindset. They want to earn now. For example, if they work in a legal framework, if they work with companies, the income, it's by the end of month, of week. So that's why we need to work together, private sector, government, and also this vulnerable population, to enhance the resilience of this kind of population. And specifically now during this pandemic, they suffer from it because nobody's they are not allowed to go around city to pick this waste. So the vulnerability of this population during this pandemic, it's very critical. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to say this is already on the ISWA website, but this website is from an organization called WeGo that supports the informal sector. And they made some posters, which some of us contributed to translate in a lot of different languages, telling informal recyclers like how long materials stay dangerous or how they can continue to work in the pandemic. That's not the same problem as not being able to pick up anything because you're not allowed on the street. But there is some thinking about the pandemic. But in general, I would agree with Miriam that one of the most important things about integrating the informal sector is you have to ask them what they want. And you have to ask them what parts of formalization or legalization they want and what parts they're afraid of. And you don't try to solve a problem that's not there. If the informal sector says, we want to formalize, like they did when I was working in Tunisia, it was pretty easy to make it happen. If they say, we don't want to, then you have a longer conversation about why don't you want to? How come you don't feel safe? How can we shift the balance so this looks like an attractive alternative for you?
Fantastic. Well, we're kind of going into final remarks, but we can come back to you, Anne and Miriam. Did you have any final remarks you wanted to say, Helena, either about something from your presentation or how the current coronavirus pandemic is impacting recycling?
So Yelena, unmute yourself. Yes, good.
Yeah, to be honest, yeah, from the film, I mean, it's not clear yet. It's still early to see it, but what I can see that some of the companies even closed the doors, you know, because the purchasing of the material was not working for a few months. And on the other hand, it was already kind of probably economic crisis within those companies. So yeah, it's not related to the metals. Metals are working, as I have information at the moment, but we stopped a little bit, like 2 or 3 weeks in Serbia, in some countries as well, collection and recycling. So it will be affected on the recycling rates during the year. So it's not like that this will be easygoing solution. Yeah, so it depends how the system is set up in the country, if the but also, yeah, separate collection, sorting and everything was also a little bit postponed, and purchasing of the material as well in some of the materials in some of the countries. So not easy at all. For example, this voluntary take-back machine system in Hungary, it was really, I mean, it was really hard to keep all that with all those hygienic measures and everything, you know, because it's a contact, it's a machine. Also, deposit was having also issues with the COVID. So I assume that we will have affected recycling rates by the end of the year by this crisis as well.
Yeah. As final remarks, just given that we're all experiencing it right now, Anne, you go first and then Miriam after. Did you have any final comments you wanted to share, but also talk about how the pandemic has affected recycling from what you've seen?
Go ahead,
first.
Miriam.
Oh, Miriam first. Okay.
Unmute her. Miriam, yeah. Okay, now you're on.
I don't have a specific recommendation. You know, that's I'm from those who I don't want to be pessimist. But I'm not sure, or maybe I'm pessimist. I'm not sure if this pandemic will change some things. Maybe we will pay attention more to, for example, here in Morocco, the impact of public transportation. Maybe we'll invest more in this in public transportation. But let me just, I want to share with you something. Do I have time? Quick image, picture.
Can you share? You're trying to share your screen.
Yeah, I will try.
Okay, let's see if it works.
Yeah.
And then we are getting pretty close to
the end.
Yeah, so go ahead and while you are working on it, why don't Jelena make your last remarks while Miriam is working on sharing?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Just wanted to share my experience that I really enjoyed in these discussions, in the questions. Here I try to answer as much as possible. So it was interesting to see what are the main interests in the presentation that I have. And my closing remark is basically that I hope that in many cases, we as an industry, we would like to see that all of these initiatives, like that we mentioned, is it a deposit or this is circular economy or is it single-use plastic or whatever, should be more global solutions. And I would like to as I presented already, my dilemma as a company working in the Eastern European country, each and every country is different. We would like to have some common solution implemented globally. From my personal perspective, global implementation of all of these nice measures that I mentioned, like circular economy, can only do the benefits, because otherwise exporting material to different countries, not recycling, it's all go around back to you, plastic or whatever issues that are coming. So basically, I think that globalization and your organization can help a lot on that. I think that's my thinking. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you. Miriam, do you have the image ready?
I can't share it, so maybe later. So it just name a cartoon from the Economist. Maybe we can you can click on it through the internet. This is a cartoon from Economist. We have the climate change as in the ring with the coronavirus, with the Earth, and it's quite interesting about that. It's here is it. Thank you. So I just want to share this with you and maybe think about what is the impact of climate change, and also that this pandemic, it's only a preliminary round. That's it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Emily, how about any last words? And Aditi, you want to come on stage and have some last words also?
Oh.
I see we may be losing everybody here. We lost Emily. Okay, I will say my last words, which is thank you all for being with us. It's been, for me, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. And we are doing it again, not about the European sphere of influence, but about countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America on July 29th. This is sort of a follow-up to this webinar. The link will come on maybe in a month. And for those of you who were here, we're interested to hear what, if anything, this gave you. And I'm sure there's an evaluation form, so please fill out the evaluation form. And thanks a lot. And I think we are done. Unless Aditi wants to say something. So